Welcome to day 135. We have First Chronicles 25 to 27 and First Thessalonians chapter 4. We have another chapter or multiple chapters of lists in First Chronicles. Now, one of these lists, the first one is about the musicians. Now, for the ancient Israelites, music was a form of prophecy, of divine inspiration. And so it makes a lot of sense that this is included in the lists. Further on, we get to officers and judges. We can see that there's a lot of tasks, even beyond the spiritual, that are included in the running of the temple and the organization of religious life in ancient Israel. But these lists are further down the line. And so you can see that the spiritual focus is the primary focus. Now, there are some lists in chapter 27 that don't seem to be connected to the temple at all. They are military leaders of David's. And these lists aren't so much setting up the religious practices of ancient Israel as trying to set a framework for the restoration of David's glory. Chronicles was most likely written after the fall of Jerusalem. This is written a lot later, and the people writing it are both trying to set up the expectations of religious life around the temple, but also glorifying, lifting up the leadership of David and this time period when Israel was independent and militarily strong. Now, Chronicles, as we read through, seems like a pretty straightforward historical document like what we are used to these days. But it was written at different times by different people, and some were establishing temple authority and practices. Some were explaining the monarchy. Some were offering a hope for Israel's governance and structure, but not necessarily a definitive description of the actual numerical reality. Another thing to remember as you go through here is that in the entire Hebrew Bible, the numbers that we see, 40, 3, 7, 24,000, are not necessarily linear descriptions like we're used to. 12 eggs, we count 12 eggs, there are 12 eggs there. There are a number of places where the numbers in the Hebrew Bible actually have symbolic meaning. Some of the numbers mean wholeness or completeness, like the number 3 or 7, or they mean infinity or a vast number. So a bigger number just means it goes on forever and ever, and we can't actually count it. So David's reign was a time of military and legal independence and strength that Israel really almost never experienced again. So as we read through some of these historical documents, we have to remember that this is not dispassionate, neutral, journalistic observers writing all of this down. They were inspired by God, but they were also living within a culture. They were influenced by their own hopes and dreams for their own people. They were influenced by the practices of the people around them. In First Thessalonians, we're almost to the end of this letter. Paul is encouraging the people who are reading the letter to act to please God with joy like a dance, and not to act and do things for God out of duty or as a burden. He encourages them to be holy on the inside as well as on the outside. In other words, don't be hypocritical. Believe inside and do the same things when no one's watching as the things you do in front of other people. Love one another, care for each other, live in such a way that others respect you, don't sponge off others, don't manipulate other people. And then there comes a big question that was a big issue for the early church and early believers. What about those people who've died before Jesus returns? So at this time, everyone was really thinking Jesus was going to come back like tomorrow, like any day now, Jesus is going to show up again. This is a very different worldview than what we have. It's been 2,000 years. Jesus hasn't come back. There are very few of us who can emotionally live each day as if we really expect Jesus to be showing up tomorrow or even today. But back then, they really did think this. And so they thought, if the people have died before Jesus comes back, what happens? And so Paul is really laying out some of the theology here. They are waiting to see his glory and be released from death. So Paul is offering comfort about life after death and Jesus's power over death. And he's going to go on a little bit more into this in the next chapter. But read through here and um, really see what Paul is trying to get at here about how Jesus has already given us promises, and it doesn't really matter when we die, how we die, where we die. The promise of Jesus, of the salvation through Jesus' victory over death on the cross, is in place already. The moment we say yes to Jesus, we receive that promise, and we do not have to worry about what is going to happen because we've already received Jesus' promise. So today, go with joy, be encouraged, live your life in the promise of everything that Jesus has to offer for us. We'll see you next time.